Father Michael had always found solace in the quiet rhythms of his church, a sanctuary for both the devout and the weary. The small parish, nestled in a quaint town, had been his home for over 15 years. Every corner of the building carried stories: pews worn smooth by decades of prayer, stained glass windows glowing with the light of 1,000 sunrises, and an altar that bore witness to countless confessions, weddings, and funerals. It was a sacred place, a cornerstone of the community's spiritual life. But recently, a shadow had fallen over the church. At first, the dwindling donations seemed like a simple sign of the times. Families in the parish had been struggling, jobs were scarce, and the cost of living had been creeping upward. Father Michael reasoned that lighter envelopes in the collection basket were just another symptom of the challenges his congregation faced. He prayed for their well-being, trusting that God would provide. But then, something unsettling happened. A parishioner approached him after a Sunday service, their voice low and hesitant. "Father," they said, "I think something's not right with the donation box. I put in cash last week, and when I asked the treasurer, it seemed like it was missing." Father Michael's brow furrowed. He thanked the parishioner and assured them he would look into it. At first, he dismissed it as a misunderstanding, but as the weeks went on, similar murmurs began to reach his ears. Each time, and the story was the same. Money placed in the locked donation box seemed to vanish without a trace. The box itself showed no signs of tampering, and only a handful of trusted individuals had access to the key. The priest's heart grew heavy. Could someone within his flock be stealing from the very church they claimed to love? The idea was almost too painful to consider. He prayed fervently for guidance, asking for wisdom to handle the situation with grace and discernment. He knew he couldn't ignore the problem, but he also couldn't bear the thought of accusing anyone without evidence. After much thought, Father Michael decided to install a hidden camera near the donation box. It wasn't an easy decision. The idea of surveillance in a house of worship felt almost sacrilegious, but he rationalized that uncovering the truth was necessary, not only to protect the church's resources, but also to address the underlying issue, whatever it might be. He installed the camera late one evening, ensuring no one would see, and prepared himself for what it might reveal. The first night passed uneventfully, as did the second and third. Each morning, Father Michael checked the footage. His stomach knotted with both dread and hope. He wanted to find an answer, but he feared what that answer might mean. On the fourth night, however, the stillness was broken. When Father Michael reviewed the footage from that night, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the screen. At first, there was nothing unusual, just the soft, flickering light from the altar candles and the faint outline of the donation box. But then, shortly after midnight, the camera picked up movement. A figure appeared, darting quickly into view. Father Michael's pulse quickened. He paused the video and studied the figure closely. It wasn't easy to make out. It was small and shadowy, slipping through the dim light like a phantom. The figure seemed to come from the side window, one that Father Michael now realized he hadn't checked to ensure it was locked. As the figure moved closer to the donation box, Father Michael's heart sank. He expected to see hands fiddling with the lock or tools being used to force it open. But what happened next defied explanation. The footage glitched for a brief moment, the screen flashing with static. When the image returned, the donation box was open, its contents gone, and the figure was retreating into the darkness as swiftly as it had come. Father Michael stared at the screen, his mind racing. Who, or what, had he just seen? The figure's movements had been too swift, too peculiar, to belong to anyone he knew. And how had they opened the box without touching it? The camera had captured no discernible action, no sound. The theft seemed almost supernatural. He replayed the footage several times, hoping to find something he'd missed. A clue, a detail that would make sense of it all. But each time, the scene unfolded in the same eerie way. The figure appeared, the screen glitched, and the money was gone. Father Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Unsure of what to do next, he decided to set up another camera, this time with a better angle and higher resolution. He also resolved to check the side window and ensure it was securely locked. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was dealing with something far beyond the ordinary. That night, as he knelt in prayer, he asked God for clarity and strength. Whatever he was facing, he knew he couldn't face it alone. The following night brought a deeper sense of unease. Father Michael found himself unable to sleep, his thoughts consumed by the mysterious figure. When he finally sat down to review the new footage the next morning, his hands trembled as he pressed play. This time, the figure appeared more clearly, stepping into view with an unearthly grace. Father Michael's breath caught in his throat. The figure was shrouded in a soft, radiant glow, its outline shimmering like sunlight on water. It knelt briefly before the altar, bowing its head as if in prayer. Then it turned toward the donation box. Father Michael watched, frozen, as the figure approached. Once again, the camera glitched just as it reached the box, and when the image returned, the box was open, its contents gone. But unlike the previous night, the figure didn't vanish immediately. It lingered for a moment, almost as if it was aware of the camera's presence. Then, with a sudden flash of light, it was gone. Father Michael sat back, his mind racing. What had he just witnessed? Was this a thief? An angel? Something else entirely? The questions swirled in his mind, leaving him both awestruck and deeply unsettled. The second night's footage had left Father Michael in a state of turmoil. The radiant figure he had seen defied all logic and explanation, and the lingering glow on the screen seemed to imprint itself in his mind long after the video had ended. Was this some kind of illusion? A trick of the light? Or was it something divine? A message sent by God himself? He couldn't bring himself to share the footage yet, not even with his closest confidants in the parish. What would they think? Would they believe him? Or worse, would they think he had lost his mind? Father Michael spent the entire day poring over the footage again and again. Each time the same questions arose. The figure was undeniably otherworldly. Its glow wasn't natural. It wasn't the flicker of a candle or the reflection of light from the stained glass windows. It seemed to emanate from within the figure itself, a warm and calming brilliance that felt oddly familiar, yet wholly unexplainable. He paused the video at the moment the figure knelt at the altar, studying its posture. There was reverence in the way it bowed its head, as though it was praying or offering thanks. That evening, as he prepared to spend another sleepless night in the rectory, Father Michael made a decision. If this figure returned, he needed to witness it with his own eyes. The camera could only capture so much. There were details that no recording device could convey. He resolved to stay in the church that night, hidden in the shadows, to confront whatever, or whoever, was behind these mysterious events. Father Michael entered the church late, after the last of the parishioners had gone home, and the streets outside had grown silent. The only sound was the faint creak of the wooden floorboards under his feet as he moved toward the altar. He carried with him a small flashlight, a rosary, and his Bible, though he wasn't entirely sure why he had brought them. Perhaps it was for courage, a tangible reminder of his faith. He found a place to hide in the shadows near the back of the church, where he had a clear view of both the altar and the donation box. He crouched behind a tall stack of hymnals and waited, the rosary clutched tightly in his hands. Time passed slowly. The flickering candlelight cast long, shifting shadows across the walls, and the silence seemed to stretch endlessly. Shortly after midnight, a faint sound broke the stillness. It wasn't the sound of footsteps or a door creaking open. but something softer, almost like the whisper of wind through leaves. Father Michael held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound grew closer, and then, just as he had seen on the footage, the figure appeared. It entered the church from the same side window, though this time Father Michael was certain he had locked it. Yet, there it was, wide open, as though the lock had been undone by some unseen hand. The figure moved with an unearthly grace, its glow filling the dim church with a warm light. Father Michael's breath caught as he saw it up close for the first time. The light wasn't harsh or blinding. It was gentle, soothing, and strangely familiar. The figure made its way to the altar and knelt, just as it had the night before. Father Michael could hear nothing, but he could feel a presence in the air, a weight that was at once calming and humbling. He watched as the figure remained there for what felt like an eternity, its head bowed in silent prayer. Then, it rose and turned toward the donation box. Father Michael's fear and awe collided in that moment. Gathering his courage, he stepped out from his hiding place and called out, his voice trembling, "Who are you? Why are you here?" The figure stopped and turned to face him. For a moment, Father Michael thought he might faint. Up close, the figure's features were indistinct but serene. Its face seemed to shimmer and shift, as though it couldn't be fully captured by human sight. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, radiated kindness and understanding. "Do not be afraid," the figure said. Its voice was unlike anything Father Michael had ever heard. It wasn't loud, but it filled the entire room, resonating in his very soul. It was a voice that seemed to carry centuries of wisdom and compassion. Father Michael felt his knees go weak, and he gripped the edge of a pew for support. Why are you taking from the donation box?" he managed to ask, his voice barely a whisper. The figure tilted its head slightly, as though considering the question. "I take nothing for myself," it replied. "What I take, I give to those in greater need." Before Father Michael could respond, the figure raised its hand, and the room was filled with images. They appeared not on the walls or in the air, but in his mind, vivid and unmistakable. He saw families in desperate need, a mother crying as she held her hungry child, an elderly man struggling to pay for medicine, a young boy kneeling by his bed praying for help. And in each image he saw the results of the figure's actions. A bag of groceries appeared on a doorstep. An envelope of cash was slipped under a door. A new pair of shoes was placed outside a child's room. Father Michael felt tears streaming down his face. The figure's voice returned, softer now. "Your church has given more than you know. The prayers of your congregation reach far and wide. Be at peace, for your faith has not been in vain." Before Father Michael could speak again, the figure began to fade, its light dimming like the last glow of a setting sun. "Wait!" he called out, but it was too late. The figure was gone, and the church was silent once more. Father Michael sank to his knees, overcome with emotion. He had sought to catch a thief, but had instead encountered something far beyond his understanding. What he had witnessed that night would remain with him forever, a reminder of the mysterious ways in which God's work is carried out. The night after his encounter with the radiant figure left Father Michael in a daze, his thoughts tangled in a web of wonder, confusion, and awe. He barely slept, replaying the encounter in his mind. The voice of the figure resonated deep within his soul, its words etched into his memory. "Your church has given more than you know. Be at peace, for your faith has not been in vain." The message had been clear, yet its implications felt profound and endless. What had he truly witnessed? Was it an angel, sent by God to guide his weary heart? Or was it something else, a test of his faith or an invitation to see the world through new eyes? By dawn, Father Michael knew he couldn't carry this burden alone. The experience had been too extraordinary to keep to himself, and the thought of doing so felt almost selfish. He needed to share it, not only for guidance, but to honor whatever divine purpose lay behind it. After morning prayers, he picked up the phone and called Bishop Andrews, his mentor and confidant. The bishop listened patiently as Father Michael recounted everything in painstaking detail. There were long pauses where Father Michael wasn't sure if Bishop Andrews believed him. When he finished, the silence on the other end was almost unbearable. "Father Michael," the bishop finally said, his voice calm but contemplative, "what you're describing, it's not something I can dismiss. I've heard stories, rare ones, of miraculous encounters, of signs and visions meant to strengthen faith. But this seems unique. You said the figure spoke of helping others?" "Yes," Father Michael replied, his voice still shaky. "It claimed to take nothing for itself, but instead gave to those in need. And I saw it, Bishop. I saw the families, the people it helped. I can't explain it, but I felt it." The bishop sighed softly, a sound that carried both reverence and the weight of responsibility. "This isn't a matter we can take lightly. If what you've experienced is truly divine, then you've been given a gift, an opportunity to witness the work of God in action. But it also raises questions, Michael. What should you do next? What does this mean for your parish, your faith?" "I don't know," Father Michael admitted. "I feel humbled, but also unworthy. Why me? Why my church?" "Perhaps," the bishop said gently, "it isn't about worthiness but willingness. You sought answers, and in doing so, you were open to something extraordinary. Now the question is how you'll use this knowledge." Father Michael nodded, though the bishop couldn't see him. The conversation left him feeling both comforted and burdened with a new sense of purpose. He decided that the congregation needed to hear at least part of the story, though he would omit certain details, the figure's appearance, the supernatural glow. He didn't want to frighten or alienate anyone. Instead, he would focus on the message of generosity, of trust in divine providence. That Sunday, the church was fuller than usual. Word had spread about the unusual steps Father Michael had taken to investigate the missing donations, and many were curious to hear what he would say. As he stepped up to the pulpit, he felt a nervous energy coursing through him. He took a deep breath, steadied himself, and began. "My dear brothers and sisters," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I've been searching for answers. For weeks we've wondered about the missing donations, and I'll admit, I approached this mystery with a heavy heart. I feared the worst, that someone among us might be taking what was meant for God's work. But what I found was something very different, something I believe is a sign, not of loss, but of hope." He paused, scanning the faces before him. They were rapt with attention, their eyes fixed on him. "I won't pretend to understand it fully," he continued, "but I've seen evidence that the generosity of this church is reaching far beyond these walls. There are families, people in desperate need, who are being helped in ways we can't always see. And though the means may be mysterious, the message is clear. We are called to trust, to give, and to believe that our faith and our actions make a difference." A murmur rippled through the congregation, a mix of surprise and curiosity. Father Michael felt the weight of their expectations, but also their growing hope. He went on to speak about the importance of faith, trusting that even when their efforts seemed small or insignificant, they were part of a greater plan. He encouraged them to continue giving, not out of obligation, but out of love and a shared commitment to helping others. As the service concluded, a sense of renewal seemed to wash over the church. Parishioners lingered longer than usual, talking in hushed tones about Father Michael's words. Some approached him with questions, while others simply thanked him, their eyes shining with a newfound sense of purpose. One elderly woman clasped his hand and said, "Father, you've reminded us of why we're here. Thank you." That evening, as Father Michael sat alone in the rectory, he felt a deep sense of peace for the first time in weeks. He didn't have all the answers, but he didn't need them. What mattered was that his faith, and the faith of his congregation, had been strengthened. The radiant figure had left him with more than just questions. It had left him with a mission. He knew the journey wasn't over. The figure might return, or it might not. Either way, he was determined to remain vigilant, to continue serving his flock with humility and devotion. And as he closed his eyes in prayer, he felt the faintest echo of that radiant presence, a reminder that he was never truly alone. In the days that followed, Father Michael noticed a quiet transformation within his parish. The story he shared during Sunday Mass had stirred something deep in the hearts of his congregation. Though he had deliberately left out the supernatural details of his encounter, the message of generosity and trust in God's plan resonated with the community in a way he hadn't anticipated. There was a renewed energy in their interactions, more smiles exchanged in the pews, more willingness to lend a helping hand, and a newfound sense of hope that seemed to ripple through the church like a gentle tide. Father Michael, too, felt changed. The encounter with the radiant figure had shifted his perspective in profound ways. He found himself noticing small miracles everywhere: the kindness of a stranger, the laughter of children during Sunday school, the quiet determination of a widow volunteering at the soup kitchen. It was as though the world had become brighter, more alive with the presence of grace. But even as life in the parish carried on, the memory of the figure lingered in his mind. Its glowing form, the warmth of its voice, and the vivid images it had shown him were imprinted on his soul. He often found himself reflecting on its words. "What I take, I give to those in greater need." Those words carried both mystery and clarity, a reminder that faith often required surrendering to the unknown. One quiet afternoon, Father Michael decided to visit a few of the families he had seen in the visions the figure had shared with him. He didn't know their names or exact locations, but he felt compelled to seek them out, trusting that he would be guided to where he needed to go. Armed with a modest collection of groceries and a few envelopes of cash from the church's discretionary fund, he set out, letting his intuition and his faith lead the way. The first family he visited lived in a small, run-down house on the outskirts of town. As he knocked on the door, he felt a pang of uncertainty. What would he say? How could he explain his presence without sounding intrusive? But when the door opened and he saw the tired yet kind eyes of the mother, he felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. "Hello," he said gently, holding out the groceries. "I'm Father Michael from St. Augustine's Church. I just wanted to offer these to you. No strings attached." The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out to accept the bags. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to us." Father Michael stayed for a while, listening as the woman shared her struggles. Her husband had been laid off, and they were barely scraping by. As he left, he felt a quiet joy in his heart. It wasn't just the act of giving, it was the connection, the sense that his faith in the church's resources were making a tangible difference. He continued this quiet mission over the next few weeks, visiting others who seemed to match the figures he'd seen in the visions. Each encounter was unique, but they all carried the same sense of gratitude and hope. Father Michael didn't reveal the full story of why he was there. He simply said he was following his heart, doing what he felt called to do. And in return, he found his own faith growing stronger with each act of kindness. Meanwhile, within the church, something remarkable began to happen. Donations started to increase. Not just money, but food, clothing, and other essentials. Parishioners who had once been hesitant to give now seemed inspired to contribute more generously. Father Michael never explicitly asked for more. It seemed as though the congregation had been moved by the collective sense of purpose and possibility. One day, a young couple approached him after Mass. They were new to the church, having recently moved to the area. The husband spoke first, his voice filled with emotion. "Father, we heard about what you said during your sermon a few weeks ago. We've been struggling ourselves, but it inspired us to start giving again, even if it's just a little. It's amazing how much lighter we feel now." His wife nodded. "It's like, when you give, you realize you're part of something bigger. We wanted to thank you for reminding us of that." Father Michael smiled, humbled by their words. "It's not me you should thank," he said. "It's God's work, always." As the weeks turned into months, the church seemed to thrive in ways Father Michael could hardly believe. Attendance at services grew, and the sense of community deepened. Parishioners began organizing new initiatives: a food drive, a scholarship fund, a team to visit homebound members. It was as though the spirit of generosity had taken root and was now flourishing, touching every corner of the parish. Father Michael often thought about the radiant figure during his quiet moments of prayer. It had only appeared to him once, but its presence was still palpable, as though it had left behind a trace of its light in his heart. He wondered if it would ever return, or if its purpose had been fulfilled. Either way, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the encounter, but for the way it had transformed him and his parish. One evening, as he stood alone in the church after locking up, he lit a candle at the altar and knelt to pray. The soft glow of the flame flickered against the walls, casting gentle shadows that seemed to dance with the rhythm of his whispered prayers. He didn't ask for answers or miracles this time. He simply gave thanks for his congregation, for the newfound spirit of generosity, and for the reminder that faith could work in mysterious and wondrous ways. As he rose to leave, he glanced toward the donation box. For a moment, he thought he saw a faint glimmer of light, like the trace of a shooting star hovering above it. He blinked, and it was gone. Whether it was real or just his imagination, he didn't know. But he smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The radiant figure might never return, but its message had left a lasting impact, one that would echo through the lives it had touched. And for Father Michael, that was enough. Faith, he realized, wasn't always about seeking answers. It was about embracing the journey, trusting in the unseen, and allowing God's grace to shine through even the smallest acts of love.